Greetings and welcome to today's painting lesson. Today we are going to endeavor into our first winter scene of the year, something I'm always very excited about. I love painting snow, especially with a warmer light coming down onto it. I think it just looks gorgeous with a cooler snow hue, and it's a very unique look that we do again get to jump in here. So we're going to do that. As per usual, all of the tools and materials are listed in the video description. So for instance, we're working with Winsor & Newton paints. All of the individual colors are listed right down there. As for brushes, today we are working with my brush set, which I'm very proud of. It's something that, again, we were working on for the majority of this year. It's finally out, and today, very specifically, you can get it for 25% off for the holidays. So if you've been wanting to pick it up, now is a fantastic time to do so. You can save quite a bit on it. And again, they are vegan, they are cruelty-free. You don't have to worry about the glue that is being used to bind the bristles or the bristles themselves. It's something that is entirely ethical and something I'm very proud of. It's also what we've been using on the channel for the majority of the year and will continue to use for all of the acrylic lessons moving forward. So if you follow the channel, if you do a lot of these lessons, it's the only brush set you need, and you don't ever have to worry about going out to get another set of brushes. That said, again, there's a link to it in the video description, and there's a pinned comment, and as per usual, you can get the traceable up over on Patreon along with the ebooks and all of that good stuff. So with that, let's have some fun and work on our first winter piece together. We are going to begin here today with a 1-inch flat-headed brush, and we will dip the bottom third of it into a little bit of water to extend the wet life of our paint, keep it wet for a little bit longer. With that, we'll head over to our palette, grab an abundance of titanium white, grab a little bit of our cerulean blue, about 1/4, and then just a hint of our Mars black. We'll mix these together to get a nice muted bluish gray. Make it a little bit more gray with additional titanium white and Mars black. We're not really using the white or black to brighten or darken it. They are really just to make it gray. Then we're going to apply it right across the top of our canvas. Make our brush a little bit damp, add some titanium white, make it brighter, work that right down below. We are working towards the sun, and I'm avoiding streaks in the sky by going back and forth very softly. The more pressure you add, the more streaks you'll have. As we get lower, we'll get a little bit brighter one more time. And yes, I am going over my drawing, but that is a-okay. We can always redraw it on again, and every time we draw it, we get a little bit better. Practice is good for us. Now we'll switch to our filbert brush because it has nice round edges, great for soft blends and clouds. I'll head over to my palette. Once again, grab the cerulean blue. However, this time I'm going to also grab some permanent rose, about an equal mixture, and these two will render a nice purple. We'll desaturate it a little bit as we did with the blue by adding in Mars black and titanium white. Work those together. We can make it a little bit more colorful and just go back and forth between the grays and the more vibrant hues until you have exactly what you want. I personally really like this. We want it to be a bit darker than what the sky is. And you know what? Might be a little too dark. Trial and error, right? So we'll interject some additional titanium white, blend that up well, head back. Perfect. Now for my clouds, I'm going to create openings. I'm going to work very softly with my brush so that I get these really fluffy edges. You can see that I'm moving my brush in a little bit of a circular pattern here and there. There we go. trying to make them soft on most sides. And as we come down here, we'll start to lose all of those openings. The openings exist at the top as the cloud opens up, as it gets thinner. This is great, it'll give us some extra depth, but we'll incorporate a different kind of detail towards the bottom. We can also go back and reapply additional layers into the middle sections to make them a bit thicker, more opaque, because realistically, we want the edges to be semi-transparent and we want the middle portions, the body of the cloud, to be thick, not transparent. And just see I'm using the rounded edge of the brush to get these the way we want. When I have an abundance of paint, I like to work more towards the middle portion of our clouds, the bodies, and then as I start to run out, then I'll work out here and get these much more thin, transparent applications. And we'll still connect them here and there. We can build some of them up over time. It gives us a lot of opportunity to play with it. And we're not kind of locked in to having a cloud in any specific area because it's so light. If I don't talk, you can hear the brush on canvas. So there's a little bit of that scraping motion. But if your brush is damp, it should be doing a lot of the work for you. Just going in and integrating a little bit more form. And then we can softly move it over some of the openings. Just make it a bit more cohesive down towards the bottom. Then we do need more paint. About an equal amount of those two. I have lots of the original color around the outskirts, so I know what I'm mixing to. And we're not going with the first color we mix, we go back and forth until we get what we really want. Typically, it just takes a little patience. We're very close. It's a little too gray, so what do? We add the red and the blue. It's a little too blue, what do? We add a bit more of a red, or permanent rose to be exact. And there we have the color we actually need. Using the corners to softly blend it back into what we have. And I think I'll extend it out just like that. Thicken some of the middle portions. A lot of this will be covered by trees, but we want to make sure it looks nice and pretty, just so we have an option of where we put those branches, because if we essentially leave it open, we have to fill it with a lot of branches, but now we can be much more selective. We're going to cover a lot of these applications towards the bottom with a different hue, but again, it's just good to have them there. So our sky is dry to the touch. I'm going to switch over to my smaller flat-headed from the set, make sure that it's a little bit damp, and we'll head to grab some of our cadmium orange for the first time. Grab about double that in our pink. A little bit of titanium white to thicken it, brighten it. A little bit of Mars black to desaturate it. But we do want it to be relatively bright. So I'll go back to the titanium white a couple of times. Just make sure we have a good amount. I do want it to be a bit more pink than I do orange. And this right here should do it. So, once we have that all mixed up, we're going to head towards the bottom of our purple cloud. And we'll just work this on that bottom section. Then, as we move up, we'll make a very consistent application, which will then very soon turn into the cloud breaking up into lots of little pieces which catch light. So here we're just painting the bottom of a lot of different clouds. All of them are down so they can catch a little bit of this beautiful light. I'm going to want to go over portions multiple times to build it up. We can even go in with a little tap. These all aren't meant to be completely horizontal though. We want a lot of them to dip down, dip back up, have genuine little movements. We can even add little bits of this highlight to the bottom of the opening areas. Though we need to apply this very softly. You can also do it with the filbert brush if you find that you're getting too hard of an edge. And we'll need to do another layer down here just to make sure that it's nice and thick. Head back up, apply some extra detail. It's one of those things where you want pattern, but you don't want too much pattern. And the best way of going about this is just taking your time, doing a little portion, looking at it, taking a step back, living with it a little bit, and then asking yourself if there should be more. You can also just follow the traceable. If you are a supporter of the channel up over on Patreon. But here you can see we're just going back and forth, finding little openings that could be advantageous with a little bit more paint. There we go. Just adding very soft highlight to the bottom of some of these. You can see this one rolls out. Gives it a bit more dimension. There we go. Now we've added some cadmium yellow deep hue to our palette. You can also use a medium hue, but we're just going to grab some of that, some clean titanium white, mix it in with a hint of our cadmium orange, and this right here is where we'll start building up the area for the sun. We're not going to use a lot of it. We'll just do a soft blend up into our previously applied areas. We'll have it burn out here. Just create that nice subtle transition. Work it down a little bit. Then we'll make it more yellow and brighter. We'll just slowly transition it in the middle of that application. Every time we go for a little bit of a blend. So it'll go from that nice pinkish orange to an orange to a yellowish orange to a yellow and each time we add a little bit more titanium white, which makes it opaque. And by yellow, I mean titanium white. The yellow is actually quite a thin pigment. When you just use it, you won't get a great opacity. You typically will really see the pigment underneath it. But with the titanium white, you can really thicken it so that it actually shows up. You lose saturation, but an easy trick is to go in with a lot more of that. Now I'm actually going to switch over to the filbert because I do want those rounded edges for these softer blends. Yet again, titanium white mixed with our cadmium yellow, medium or deep hue. Soft applications, slightly rounded. We'll interject a little bit of orange, a little bit of a red, and work backwards for a second. If you do a little bit too much yellow, this is a great way of walking it backwards and reintroducing those transitions. That's the beauty of acrylic painting. If something doesn't turn out perfect initially, it's okay. We just let it dry. We come back to it with our lessons learned, create something even better. Such a forgiving medium. One that really rewards patience and people who stick with it, trust in the process. So that's what we're doing. There we go. Now we'll switch back to the larger flat-headed brush and start working on the silhouetted trees in the background, starting with some of our Mars black. We'll grab about 1/3 of that in our Cerulean blue, a hint of our pink just to give it slightly more of a warmer hue to. This way it's nice and cohesive, it's not just a dark silhouette. And we can add a hint of titanium white, which will brighten it and allow us to see some of our color a little bit better. Then we're going to go to the essentially horizon and our tree line. I'm going to paint in the bottom of said tree line. Just some very clean strokes, like that. Then we're going to go to the bottom, and we're just going to work our brush up a little bit. And this is going to give us a very easy, quick base for our trees, which we will embellish with a different brush. It's also going to make some of them a little bit detailed, others not so much. It removes a level of control, which I like. It gives it a bit of a randomized application to a point, which is typically great in nature because we innately tend to fall on patterns when we paint, which can take the natural out of the nature. And by doing this, we force its instigation. There we go. You can see that it gets a little bit higher as we work towards the right-hand side. very intentional. We'll put that brush down after mixing up just a little bit more of that same pigment. There we go. And we'll opt for something a bit more intentional with the small liner brush. It's our first time using it here. Fantastic for real detail work. We're going to make it damp to really condense those bristles. Then we're going to head in and paint some trees. We have the majority of the larger part already done, which is great. It means we can just focus on the protruding trees which stick out of the larger area. You can see that I'm trying to get them to be different sizes. Some of them are going to have a little bit of a lean to them. We're also going to continue the pattern of moving up. So I'll just make a little note of that with this one, how high I want to get in between these two. And then I'll do another up here. I'm just doing a little bit of a detailed application towards the sides. A lot of these markings are going down diagonally, but I do like to change the amount of how diagonal it is. And sometimes I also occasionally have them go up a little bit, and there's a bit of a crisscross. Just makes it more interesting. We're also continuously going back and grabbing water so that we can make it nice and sharp. The more you apply paint, the more you go through with these trees without getting more paint or water, the harder it'll become, because you'll run out of what's making it apply softly and easily. So just remember to go back to your water dish, back to your palette, because it will make a difference. You can see that we're leaving little openings between a lot of these trees. There we go. Grab a little bit more. Like that a lot. Now we do get smaller towards the sun. These trees are a little bit farther away, so they're just going to look tinier. So we'll just do slight protrusions. We're already going to have some because of how we applied the paint, and in those areas we don't need to continue it. This is just for the areas that look a little bit unfinished or could use a little embellishing. Here I'm doing a bit of a tap and a drag relatively quickly. Might not look like it, but I am removing my brush from the canvas every time I apply. These are really far away, and we kind of get into something that looks soft despite the fact that it's not. Then over here, maybe we can make it a little bit more structured because it moves back towards us. So we're really playing games with the distance of these silhouetted trees, and that just makes it much more unique and interesting. Gives it more depth. Now we're going to start working on the melted ice, and we'll jump back in with the larger flat-headed brush. Grab some of our Cerulean blue, titanium white to brighten it, Mars black to desaturate it and darken it a little bit. Then we're going to add just a hint of our cadmium yellow to give it a slight green hue. which we don't have present anywhere else. It'll diversify it nicely. There we go. So with this, I'm actually going to paint over all of the drawn on pinkish orange reflections for now, and we'll just reinstigate them a little bit later. I'm also doing all of my edge work first, because again, when you have fresh paint on your brush and you've recently added water to it, you have the best opportunity to render sharp markings. There are 3 spots that are going to have this pigment. There we go. And then once you have all of those edges mapped out, we can just fill it in. Apply some extra pressure with our brush. And much like every other base layer, you probably want to apply it, let it dry, add a second layer, and then come back to continue with the next steps. So we have our second layer applied, and we are going to add in some depth, reflections, texture to all of that, but we're going to take a little break from this area and work on the rest of our snow. We'll do so by grabbing some titanium white, cerulean blue, Mars black, and we want a mid valued grayish blue to start this off. So just add a little bit more, like so. Work this along the top. Again, we do our edges first. Work our way down in between our previous applications, and this will be fun because we'll get to fully cover all of the open space on our canvas. That said, as we start to move in closer to us in the painting, we're going to make it a little bit darker. So slightly more Mars black, not a grand amount, but a little bit. And when we add that extra Mars black, we do have to add in the extra cerulean blue because we are desaturating it. And we're just doing this because we are moving farther and farther away from that sun, that light. So this will progressively get darker, and that will instigate a little bit of depth early on before we really do anything elaborate to the snow in these areas. And then we'll just do a nice little blend, putting the two pigments together. We're also going to take this same pigment, work it over here, with a little bit of a brighter mixture on the very top and the very bottom. Because the light is coming through here, it's going to catch the top area, and the bottom part protrudes and catches a little bit of light as well. We want the difference to be incredibly subtle, but we do want there to be a slight difference. There we go. Definitely needed that extra layer. And then we'll do a soft blend from the bottom into the top. Of course, we will need to go back and do a second layer. Now, my second layer is going to be a little bit more complicated because I am going to use some of our pink. I'll work that in with our blue a lot of titanium white. And we'll just get a little bit of that color from the sky to work its way in to the rest of the painting. Just like this. Mixing up a good amount because we do have a fair surface area to cover. This will blend with our previous application to a point, which is nice. It'll make it a bit more subtle. Wanted that blue to be able to show through if this was thin. Now you can really see a difference between the snow and the reflective areas. That said, as we move closer, we're going to make it a bit more blue. There we are. And we'll make it a bit darker. Now you don't have to add in this extra color. It does make it a little bit more tricky, but I like how it ties the top and the bottom of the piece together. Now before I blend those two, I'm going to go over and do this area as well. That way I don't dilute this pigment before I'm done with it. Now we can do our blend, where we bring that purplish blue down and the darker blue up. Then just soft strokes to avoid any real streaks. Now we're going to let that dry. It's very reflective right now. And we'll head over here. I'll just use that darker current mix. Make something a little bit brighter. Maybe a little bit more blue. We are farther away from that warmer pink and orange light. Again, we're doing the top and the bottom before we start the blend. And then we'll do a little blend. There we are. From there, we let it dry yet again. Now I'm going to switch back to the filbert brush, and you can do this step when it is dry or when it isn't that snow. Mine is partially dry, just so I can show you the in-between. And I'm going to start with some titanium white, some cerulean blue, a little bit of our pink, and we're going to mix up something even brighter than our previous snow mixture by just a little bit. We want to avoid the other pigments on our palette, and we're going to start applying a brighter version of our snow, but we're not going to apply this over the entirety of our previous applications. Now we're using the filbert brush because it has our rounded edges, allowing us to get these very soft blends, even if our previous pigment is dry. But what I'm going to do is I'm essentially going to find the top of all of the snow and apply this highlight to it. This is just that light coming down, working its way on top. So we can even add it to these darker areas, but I'm only applying it to the space closest to the sky, and then it dissipates as it moves down and as we get towards the edge here. We can work it down here, and again I'm just applying it on the top area. We're just giving our snow some depth. There we go. We can also mix up a bit more. Don't want too much of our blue and red because we need it to remain a bit of a brighter pigment. Apply it on the top of this because it will get some extra light as it does protrude and stand above the majority of the other snow. We'll also work it this way a little bit, though I think I'll make my mixture a little bit more blue because we are again moving farther away from that light. I might even play with it, have it come out over the ice a little bit. We can tap in little bits that are working their way into the ice. See that? Just little details. Take off the excess, and then again, because our brush has a fairly rounded corner, we'll do a little blend up this mound. The body of the mound will remain darker though because it's facing the opposite side of the light. But we can have a bit more on the edge and just have it progressively get darker. Like that. We can even have a little bit of that snow, a little bit of that highlight work its way up occasionally. Just give it some texture, give it a little bit of body. I'm not applying a lot of paint at any one point. We're just slowly building. Then we can go back over here, build this up a little bit more. Not doing one area in totality. I'm jumping between them so that they all progressively get an equal amount of attention, but not all at once. That way I don't accidentally overdo one area and force myself to overdo another. There are also areas that will look better when they have a lot, but we shouldn't add a lot because we can't add a lot elsewhere. So it's one of those things where you have to sacrifice certain areas going above and beyond, looking incredible, because they'll make everything else look unnatural, or the piece as a whole just feel a little too much. You can see it's taking a lot of layers, a lot of going back and forth, but we are getting there. And a little bit of an extra highlight right here, just on that corner. Have it work its way down, back, maybe a little bit here too. Down, back. Little taps. More we can just work in over the ice. Just little bits of snow that find their way out there. We can do that over here as well. We do want to be careful because this is a very bright pigment and we don't want to overdo it. There we go. Now, once everything is fully dry, we're going to switch to our filbert brush and head back to grab some of our pink, a little bit of the orange, and abundance of titanium white, and we'll remix essentially the pink that we previously had. Here you can see I'm doing that on a spot on my palette that has that pigment, so I can mix to it with some level of certainty. And then we're going to start applying the reflection of these clouds down into our snow and ice. So these are essentially patches of ice that are catching light, just like that. We have another one right up here, just looking at my reference photo. I'll apply a little bit of extra paint in that center area, just to make sure that it's nice and thick, nice and opaque. But we're not done. We're going to head down here and apply quite a bit of it in this space. That said, I do need more. So, titanium white, pink, a little bit of orange. You can see it's easy to overdo the orange. We're not going to water this down too much just because it is going to be fairly thin. It will require multiple layers to start looking good. And the more we water it down, the more layers it will require. We're essentially just working on all of these puddles within the ice. We have little openings in between. It's very unique. It progresses down. As it gets closer to us, the bodies of puddles get larger and will allow it to dissipate as it really moves towards us. So I have almost no paint left on my brush. It's just a little damp. You can see that I'm getting a very soft blend down into where we are. And then we can do a little bit more over here. Same idea, just let it fade off into the bottom. We can have it fade off over here. Just dissipate very naturally. Like so. That said, that is only layer number one. And again, we need an abundance of them. So I'm going to put that brush down. We're going to pick up our liner, make it a little bit damp. Take off the excess. We'll build up a version with slightly more titanium white, because titanium white is a lot more of a thick pigment than our pink or orange, and we can layer a more saturated version on top of it later. It's also going to give us slightly more control, but I wanted to start with a filbert because I wanted to incorporate those softer blends, which we weren't going to be able to do with ease when working with this brush. So the filbert and those rounded edges are really useful when working on these detailed areas. And this is a spot you really do want to put a lot of thought and attention into in terms of its progression. We've already put a lot of work into the rest of the painting, so we don't want to get lazy now. You can see just how much better it looks as we bump up these colors. Little splashes of that pink. And then again, it needs to dissipate, which will be a bit more difficult with this brush, but going to work horizontally. Take off the excess paint, make it a little bit damp. Do a bit of a wet into dry blend. I'm expanding the bristles by pressing harder with the brush, as you can see. And that just allows me to get a larger stroke. There we go. Head back up here, slowly build this over time. There we go. Still have a good subtle transition towards the right. I think I might elaborate on this a little bit. Try not to do too much too early, just so I have room to add where I want. Not kind of locked into anything. That said, if you want to make it really easy, again, you can find the traceable up over on Patreon. It's linked in the video description. It's a great way to support the channel if you'd like to, but it's also just a great way to help you with the drawing process. So you have the perspective, the sizing, the detail work, the progression all correct. It'll also help you with our trees when we get to those, and again up there you can easily get access to all of the ebooks, including Acrylics for Beginners, which is essentially the essentials, everything you need to know about acrylic painting before you jump into your first painting. Sorry, I'm very tuned into what I'm painting right now. But again, you can get the ebooks. You can also get access to our exclusive Facebook group where everybody shares their renditions of these. Get inspiration, get help from the community. It's a great community. There we go. I like that a lot. I have almost no paint left on my brush, but I know that there are going to be trees and bushes here, and there's going to be a little bit of reflection. So while I have almost nothing here, I'll create a secondary little reflection, much softer, much more transparent. Gonna have that work into and around the rest. Dissipate as we get closer up here. And there's a little bit of a lip right here that's darker and a bit more green. It's important. Because it shows that there's something in the way. Just building it up. Okay, so I have my trees re-sketched on, and I'm switching to my smaller, flat-headed brush. Because it's time to start painting these in, this is a nice sharp edge, it'll be great for that detail work. And we're going to begin here with a darkish blue. Now here, that's an ultramarine. What we've been using is a Cerulean. I accidentally put that on my palette, but it does go to show you the difference between the ultramarine and the Cerulean. This is a bit more muted, it's less rich, it's a little more cool, it's a little more towards the green side than it is the purple hues. So it is beneficial to work with different blues. This painting, I think, really works well with the Cerulean, and we're going to grab some of that Mars Black, darken it, Titanium White, re-brighten it, but most importantly, as we always say, desaturate it, right? So we'll just go back and forth until we have a darkish, grayish blue, and I think that's actually really nice. So I'll make sure my brush is nice and damp, and then I'm going to start painting in my branches. Now, you'll notice that I'm not making an individual long stroke, which kind of bends and turns. I'm making a litany of tiny little ones, very intentionally. And we're doing this so that we get something that looks a lot more natural. Typically, these trees do have lots of little bends and unique movements in them, and they're not softly winding. I think that's an issue a lot of people run into when they start painting trees. That makes it look less realistic than it should. Mix up some more paint. Make sure it's nice and damp, but not too wet, because you don't want it to get watery like it did at the top of that branch there. I'll have to go back over that, but I want to let it dry before I do. This is a bit more thick. Though I don't want to go in and make them too thick initially. It's easier to make them thicker. It's hard to make them more thin because you have to recreate the colors that surround it. So typically when you do this, start with a less is more approach and then slowly build. Also, as you get towards the bottom, you can press slightly harder with your brush. It'll expand your bristles and make the tree naturally get larger, which makes sense because it should be smaller at the top, because those branches are a lot younger, haven't had time to develop and get Nice thickness that the bottom portions do. Now we're not going to have an abundance of foliage on our tree like we normally do because it's winter. And as a result, we need to be much more mindful with our branches, where typically we can kind of get away with some loose strokes or unintentional markings because we can just cover up the areas we don't love with foliage, right? Here that is not the case. All of these matter, so we put the time and effort into getting them right. Yet again, cerulean blue, Mars black, titanium white. Love this brush for what we're doing. It's the perfect size. Feel like I can get all the detail that I want, branches like this, but when it's time to expand, it's really easy. Just pressing harder with my brush. There we go. Typically we want to start towards the top of our tree in the branches because that's when we have most wet paint. However, if you have a lot of really good control and a nice new brush, sometimes it doesn't matter that much. But in general, that's a good rule. We have one of our largest trees over here to the left, which I like a lot. It almost silhouettes this area to a point. We're going to go back and just fix up that edge so it doesn't look toothy. There we go. So now we have the main portions of our tree blocked in. Might want to go over some portions just to make it a little bit thicker in diameter, but also potentially in the opacity as well. It's much more personal though. Then we can start applying tiny little branches. They can work their way through and around. What's really important with these is that you find different trajectories for them, that they're unique, and that they frequently overlap and crisscross, because that's when it's going to look the most natural. Mine are also a little bit watery here, but I'm okay with that because it's letting the hues from the sky shine through, and it just looks like it's wrapping its way around a smaller branch. Makes it look slightly farther away, which is good. Easily interjected detail within the trees. You can see that we're just working our way up and around with different angles. We need to do a lot out here. Make it look natural. Sometimes they'll also be moving downwards, especially if they're larger because they might be heavy. Typically the smaller ones have an upwards trajectory. Something that will happen is that it will start to look quite busy. If you want to make it look less busy, you really reinstate the form and the size of the larger pieces, because doing so will give the eye something to attach to again. You don't want it to look busy to the point where the eye doesn't know where to go or how to move. And busy is fine. We just need proper bases and foundations. See, we're really building that up towards the top, and it's still a little empty, to be honest. That's okay. We can just keep adding, building. There we go. It's nice. That looks really nice. I like that movement. Also, I know I just noted that my own work looked really nice. Not meant to be an egotistical comment. I do think it's important, though, that we reinforce the idea that it is okay to take pride in your work, especially the tiny little strokes that bring everything together. I think it makes the piece more fun and rewarding, and it's okay. So, if you do a little area and you love it, it's okay to put that out into the world. It's also just good that you're taking note of it, because often when we do that, we remember how we did it, why we did it, and we can reinstate that idea, that technique, into future works. Right? It's very thin. We're getting there. Certainly getting there. It's one of those processes that does take some time. And I'm going to mix up a good amount of paint with this brush. And then we're going to change things up a little bit. I'm going to clean that. Very good. Switch to the liner. And this is where we can get extremely detailed and intentional. I was saying that it was looking a little incomplete earlier, and that was okay. That was because we intended to go back in with this. You can see I'm fixing up a lot of the ends, making them much more unique, making them sharper, elongating. It's working well. There we go. Looking for open areas of sky because it'll stand out much better in those areas. I'm using my hand to brace on the canvas a little bit to eliminate shake. I know that I can really get in the habit of paint because I love it and it's great. But as a result, sometimes you forget to eat, you forget to drink, and your hand gets a little shaky, and you need to balance it. That said, don't forget, nutrition is important. We should ensure that we are taking little breaks to have a snack, have a meal. Painting is a catharsis, and that's wonderful, but it should be a balanced catharsis. There we go. We're going to add a lot of additional detail to these with different hues, and we're going to make them much more three-dimensional. So I'll just finish up a couple of branches, and then together we'll proceed to really embellish that which we're working on. There we go. Okay, so now once that's dry, we're going to mix up a brighter variant of it using our cerulean blue, more titanium white, and still a little bit of Mars black because we don't want it to be too saturated, and we do want it to be cohesive with the rest of the tree. So we'll just mix this up, and we'll apply it on the right-hand side of the larger branches. And we're doing this because the sun is on the right-hand side. Something else important to note that I'm dodging a lot of the branches that go in front of these. They'll really stand out against the silhouettes. There we go. We're essentially just painting the light on the side, and this will add a lot of dimension to our trees. Make them a bit more connected to the world. Monitoring that lighting is important when you're painting. And again, I'm dodging lots of little branches in the process. If you wanted, you could also add a hint of your pink or orange into this. Typically pink, because the orange will just desaturate it, as blue and orange are complementary colors, but the pink could work well. I just want to keep the foreground a bit more blue. As it is farther away from that sunset. And I do want there to be a change in the hue's temperature as you move from the background to the foreground. Just doing a little bit more, again, only focusing on the larger branches, the trunks, and on the right hand side of them, while also dodging lots of the there we go. Lots of the little branches. There's also another scenario where we can ground our hand to make this process a lot easier. Now, we're going to make a much darker mix. Mars black, cerulean blue, a little bit of titanium white, but something darker than what we've used for any of the tree prior. We can paint in some little knots in the tree. In the trees, plural. We can also spot them a little bit. We can add a deeper shadow towards the back and left hand side. So opposite of where we added the highlights just a second ago. We don't want this to go all the way over these. We don't want to overdo that, but we'll take a similar approach to what we did with the actual implementation of the smaller branches, and that's a less is more, progressively add it. Just adding a lot of character and texture through a tap. There we go. You can see that I'm also jumping around quite a lot. It's very intentional. Also, when we're down here, we can implement lots of tiny little branches that work their way out, crisscross. We can see them in the snow, just kind of getting lost down there. There we are. Also place some over here. We don't want them to all be the same, so make sure you change your stroke trajectory. And we do want them to be a bit darker than what I have there. They're extremely thin because they're very watered down. And that water is great because it does condense our bristles, gives us the opportunity to render much sharper markings, but we do need to be careful and go back sometimes. That said, I want to let that dry because I don't want to work on top of a lot of water. That'll make it more difficult to get the exact tiny strokes I want. So I'll take a little bit of a break there and I'll just work my way up the tree. Deliver a couple knots here and there, a little bit of texture here and there. So many little places to add on to. We can do this to the entirety of some branches, but not all. You can really see that it's starting to pop better though. It's really forging its identity here in the painting, the tree itself. Being careful in these areas because the markings are already so tiny. Just make a little bit more pigment. By the way, I always ask the question, how do I keep my paint wet for so long? How do we just keep going back to it? I don't. This is a small painting, but one that is currently on day number 3 of working on it. Because I like to have a little side canvas, I like to test my colors, I like to do a lot of pre-planning when I do these lessons. It isn't just the 2 to 3 hours that you end up watching, it's a couple days of just figuring things out, putting them together. Sometimes I'll film a lesson and I'll think, you know what, if I painted that first, it would make the process better, and then I'll end up just redoing it. So, point being, we're on day 3, and this palette is that of one that has dried many times. And then I just add a little bit more paint. Try not to add too much, but I also try to add enough that I can freely blend the way that I want to, because I think when we don't add enough, a lot of us tend to say, oh, you know what, I don't need that much blue, we'll say, in our mixture. We don't need that much red in our mix. It doesn't need to be that purple. And because of that, we make all these little sacrifices that end up, over time, having a big impact on the painting. So I try to add a fair amount of paint, enough that that doesn't happen. But I also try not to be wasteful. It's a balance, right? And you can get different types of palettes and things to help preserve the paint. I've never found one that I loved, that I felt like actually really worked. So I think it's just a little bit of acceptance that we add it back, and then eventually it gets intuitive as to how much you add for the most part, right? But I just thought I'd answer that a little preemptively, because it is a very common question on these videos. And that's okay. Having a lot of fun here. Let's go back down. That's much darker, as you can see, which is great. Something I'm noticing is I like these a lot more when they aren't hyper rounded. So I'm trying to make them a bit sharper. Look at my reference photo, there's a lot right through here. Need to make a smaller marking. Just make sure that they're all different sizes, if they crisscross, if some of them have little bends and breaks in them. Again, we put a lot of time into this. We don't want to get lazy with it right now. Spreading them out. We'll have some getting lost behind the little mounds of snow to give us extra depth. There we go. Do one or two down here just to make it a little bit more interesting. We'll also take this, and what we want more through here. We're also going to head over here and create a line of them in the snow in the back. We can barely see it. You can see little breaks between it though. And it'll get progressively closer to us. So it's not just a horizontal line, it's one that's moving diagonally in our direction. And so they'll get bigger as we get closer to the right, as they move down the canvas. Still trying to make it all unique, like so. It's just an easy little detail that I think gives it some good dimension. It makes a transitionary value between that of the trees in the foreground and the trees in the background. Very good. Love these details. That's where it all comes together. And again, we don't do them all at once. It's a real back and forth. We can also head back up here, deliver some extra branches. Try not to make too elongated strokes. We need these to be really sharp. So do use the smallest liner brush you have. And, again, you can pick up the Channels brush set in the description if you'd like to use exactly what I'm using. And today only, the day that this video is posted, you can save 25% because of the holiday. So if you want a deal on the set, today is the day. I'll also have it in a pinned comment, make it really easy for you if it's something you're interested in. These brushes are cruelty-free and vegan, which might sound like a silly thing to associate with brushes, but you'd be amazed by how unfortunate a lot of brushes are made, with what type of hair, where that hair comes from, the glues that are used to bind brushes. And with these ones, you know that you can have a very clear conscience, which is something that I very much appreciate. That said, we have one more step. We'll use this brush. We want to head down and we need a little bit of yellow. So I'm just going to reach across you there. We'll grab our cadmium yellow deep hue, or again, you can use a medium hue. We'll add that to our palette. We are going to go back to mixing a little bit of green. Something that I think looks very subtle right now, but I love in the painting. So, sticking with the liner brush, we'll grab that. We'll head over to our previous screen. We want to mix a slightly darker version of it. So extra Mars black. To make it green, we need the blue and the yellow. Yellow and the Mars black will also make it green, but it'll just feel much more cohesive if we use the blue that we already have. You can see we're getting close to it. This is a little bit more blue. It's okay, it's also something that needs to be darker.
Make it slightly more blue, but not much. And there we go. Darker iteration of what we had. And we're just going to use this to create a little bit of a shadow for each of these. So there's that. That one. And I'm dodging little bits of snow. This will just give it a little bit more dimension. There we are. Love that. Nice and easy. And I said it was the last step. It's not quite. We're almost there though. It's one of those paintings that I'm really enjoying and I just don't really want to stop. And I feel like we can always just find something new to add. Here though, I think it's important. So we're going to grab some titanium white, some cerulean blue, a little bit of Mars black. We're mixing up more of our snow color to make it brighter. Our snow is definitely brighter. Do a little test on the snow. That works wonderfully. Then we can tap this and do a little drag out here, placing it over some of those reflections, placing it over little portions of this as well. We don't want to overdo it. We can build up the highlights here too. Have it come down. There we go. This is just going to give us a little bit of extra texture. Make it look slightly more natural. When it's completely pristine and you don't have that snow out in all of these areas, it might feel a little synthetic almost. And we're just going to do little bits, predominantly towards the edging, but it can occasionally go out as well. Love that. So, again, I hope you enjoyed your stay. As per usual, towards the end of these, I like to give you a little keyword, a little secret word that you can incorporate in the comments to know that you are one of the typically 13% who makes it to the end of these videos. Always very, very proud of those who do. I know that these are not short videos and that they require quite a bit of time and attention, and if you made it here, then you are, again, one of those 13% who is really dedicated to learning, and I respect that greatly. So, today, we have a little bit of melting ice in here. Let's go with the term melt. You can type that in the comments or you can incorporate it into a comment. But if you do that, I and everybody else who got this far will know that you are, again, one of those very dedicated painters. I always find it really fun to see who gets them time after time. You can see it's so hard to put the brush down. It's just too much fun. I'm enjoying myself. There we go. That said, I don't want to overwork it. And I think it is smart to let a painting sit when you are quite happy with it, and then look at it. Keep it out, look at it for the next 2-3 days, and then if you feel like there's something you want to add after really living with it, then you go back and add. But that way you don't kind of do anything too preemptively, and you get a real read on how you feel about a piece. So, that is our piece here today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of the community. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you had a lot of fun. I hope you feel inspired to go out and create your own piece. And again, if you need help with the drawing process, you can find the traceable for this up over on Patreon, along with the ebooks, as well as access to our exclusive Facebook group, bonus lessons, all of that fun stuff. And again, you can find the brushes in the video description. 25% off today only. So, thank you. I will see you soon with a brand new painting lesson. I already know what the next one looks like. I've sketched it out. I'm really excited about it. It's very unique, and you will see it quite soon. So, subscribe if you haven't. And above all, as always, stay creative.